right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another edition of the Talking with Tarashuk podcast. My name is Will Tarashuk, T as in Thomas, Arashuk. A big thank you to my guest last week, Adrian McIntyre. Man, we went a little long, but luckily got enough content where I could take a week off because I was on vacations, but now I am back. And today, my guest is a man by the name of Jon Cooper. Jon is the host of Counterpoint Politics, a leftist content creator covering a large area of topics such as abortion rights, open borders, universal health care, universal basic health income, justice system reform. I'm really fucking this one up. Systemic inequality, and much, much more. I want to talk about his process, how he thinks, how he creates content on TikTok. He's about 60,000 views. That's about 60,000 more than I got. We'll hash out whatever we disagree on, and this is going to be a lot of fun. Jon, my man, another Hofstra boy. It's been,
yes.
I saw you a long time ago when I started on TikTok about a year ago. I was like, I know this kid. I know him from somewhere, and I somehow found you on Facebook. I was like, oh yeah, Hofstra boy. One day I'll get him on, and that day is today. Jon, my man, how are you? Good to see you.
Doing well. Don't want to be that guy, but you said 60,000 views, 60,000 followers on TikTok,
yes,
millions of views. So
millions of views.
Didn't want to think you just scraped some guy from Hofstra up for your audience here.
No, absolutely not. I didn't mean to say followers. I'm sitting pretty at like 430, 200,000 views, but millions of views. Excellent. So yeah, tell me this. Let's just start there. You are the host of Counterpoint Politics. So just tell me this, how you got that idea, why you started on TikTok, and where else people can find you.
It actually started as I wanted to create content. We both went to Hofstra. You were for radio, I believe. I was for TV and film. I have a creative background, ended up more in the business side of things, video production and marketing, and wanted a creative outlet for myself. And also at the same time wanted to, start a political career. Always been interested in politics, figured a good way to, kill two birds with one stone was to make political content, grow a following that would give me optionality in the future, right? So I just kind of committed to doing one TikTok a day on different topics and current events and things that I cared about. And committing to that. Obviously in the beginning they kind of sucked. They got better, and at a certain point it started catching on with people. Now I have, as you said, 60,000 followers, millions of views. Starting Instagram more recently, that's already up to 20,000 followers. So doing well. You can get me on TikTok at Counterpoint Politics. Instagram is Counterpoint_politics. Those are the two places people can find me.
Yeah, I saw Counterpoints. It's like, ooh, that's not. I don't know. It's probably, I don't know if it's taken on YouTube, but I know how I get my news is Breaking Points, and they have a Wednesday show which is called Counterpoints. But so you started on TikTok. That's interesting because TikTok was the last place I went to. Then again, I've been doing podcasting since 2015, so I started on iTunes. So funny how that works out. And now you don't have a podcast, right? You're just Counterpoint Politics is strictly on TikTok and I guess now Instagram Reels.
Yes, I do not have a podcast right now. However, in very shortly, I'll be starting a show with two other content creators called The Left Wing, which will be in podcast form as well as a YouTube channel. So that'll be coming soon to a screen near you.
Awesome. Excellent. Yeah, because, man, listen to your TikToks. It's just like this man needs a podcast. This man needs to be speaking in front of a microphone for like an hour. Because you are very, very articulate. You're clearly very intelligent. You're very well thought out on your points and your arguments. The content I like specifically is when you're on here facing this way, saying one point, and then you counter the conversation on the other side wearing different clothes, and from you're looking at each other. You're talking with yourself. I think that is probably your best content, at least what I like to watch. So why was that the most effective way to actually do the content?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to say that I invented it. There's, different, I got that from different people. However, a lot of times I get comments on there's like, oh, you're debating yourself because you can't beat anyone else. No, that's not the reason I made those videos. Every counterpiece to that, every argument I'm arguing against, I get from my comments, from talking to people in the comments and my DMs on Twitter, whatever. And then I construct those into a narrative, which I then, give the other side to why it's wrong. And yes, it's scripted. Obviously, I'm making scripted content. It's going to be biased toward my point. But the reason that I do that is because it provides a narrative. When I'm just sitting here talking to someone and just talking at the screen, that can be effective. I have gotten big videos that way. But the more just consistently engaging content is when you provide a narrative, when you provide characters. And simply doing that can turn a difficult, boring concept like universal basic income into something that is easier for the common person to understand who isn't well versed in, the jargon of economics or healthcare, whatever the topic might be.
No, that's very smart. Take the comments and just write a script from it, because that's literally what people are saying to each other. So I definitely think that's very smart. But you did see the keyword bias. So I think just in general, when you're talking about politics, talking about news, talking about this kind of stuff we're going to talk about, it's very important to lay out your biases, because everyone is biased. It's impossible to not be biased. So you're self-described as a lefty. I don't know what I am, to be honest. Like, I like to think of myself as a populist libertarian, if there is such a thing. So, like, I do support like a universal basic income. I support a public option for healthcare. I don't necessarily support straight socialized medicine, but a public option I think is phenomenal, because I think the public service can also be a phenomenal option. I like choices. And I'm very big on just personal freedoms and rights. Now, does that make me a leftist or a right person? I don't know. I think sometimes you can define yourself one way, but at the end of the day, if you're big enough, people are going to label you what they want to label you, and that's what you are. So it doesn't really matter. So what are your biases? How do you self-identify?
Yeah. So, and that's always an interesting question, right? Like, how do you self-identify? How do you take all of these things that every individual has slightly differently and put it into an easy to understand term and for the entire population to get what you're about? I mean, the easiest thing, as you said, I'm a leftist. I identify as a progressive. The thing that I'll say to get more specific is I'm a progressive utilitarian. I believe that we should always be striving to do the best we can for the greater good. And that is kind of the goal of life, of society, of having a government in general. And so all of my kind of policy philosophies just stem from that idea. What creates the greatest good for the people in this world, in our country? The other, philosophy I identify as, which some people recognize, is called Ubuntu, which is, if you're familiar with Nelson Mandela, it was a philosophy that he preached, and it is a West African word for that means I am because we are, and that's the simple acknowledgement that everything I do in life has been influenced by millions of people who came before me. And there's no such thing as a self-made man. We all receive help from someone else. You can't become a billionaire selling products to dead people, right? So, it's at some level, we all need society to, raise the tide and lift all boats. And that's the types of policies that I typically get behind.
Yeah, it sounds like an advanced version of populism.
Yeah, no, I think that libertarian populism and what I describe myself as, we probably agree on a lot of things. We might have some disagreements. If anyone's ever heard of horseshoe theory, it's the theory that when you go far enough left or right on the political spectrum, you begin to agree more than the people in the center. Yeah. And I think that is very true in a lot of cases. I think I have my problems with libertarianism in general. As do I. But I think that you probably have the same problems as I do, and we can agree on a lot of things. More the extremism of libertarianism isn't quite the word, but the dogmatic adherence to no government is sort of usually my problem with libertarianism. But when you acknowledge government can have solutions, we just need to minimize the reductions of our freedoms, I can usually get behind that. Yeah, because I don't mind calling myself libertarian, but just don't think of me as a crazy libertarian. Because some libertarians are just I just kind of want laissez-faire, but no, that doesn't work either. that is terrible. No, you need government. I hate government. I despise government, especially in its current form. But I understand the necessity that government is supposed to provide certain things, and certain libertarians kind of just no, let the free market do everything. But it's well, no. You can't do that either. Power needs checks and balances from all forms. We have checks and balances in government, but we also need checks and balances in corporations with relation to the government. And sometimes libertarians can get lost in that ethos of, but free market capitalism is good. I very much agree. I think that the thing that my issue with libertarianism in general is, and I don't want to make this a whole discussion on libertarianism, but I think that the problem is that they think that freedom from government is somehow more important than freedom from private control. And to me, as a utilitarian, freedom is freedom. I don't care who's restricting my freedom, whether it's the government or whether it's a private corporation. If a gun's to my head, a gun's to my head. And that's, I want the most freedom possible. And that sometimes means, even to a libertarian, you got to do, like, even the most libertarian will be like, yeah, no, we do need to come together for defense, like that's important. If we don't have a military, other countries can just invade us. So we got to have something, right? But yeah.
So when researching the show, I think it's another important thing you got to ask people when you're talking about news and politics. Where do you get your news? Because it's kind of weird. I don't like asking people that question. Where do you get your news? It's like, well, am I ashamed of where I get my news? So let me ask you, like, who is your trusted news source? Because trusted news source doesn't really mean anything anymore, unfortunately. So who do you trust for your news?
I mean, I think that like trusted news, like you have to acknowledge that, like you said, everyone has their bias. There's no news source where I'm like, this is the silver bullet, this is what's going to be true all the time. No, I get your news from a variety of sources. I say I like treating news like Wikipedia, where have your tent poles that you like. I like Axios a lot just because it presents news in a very easy to understand and clear format. It doesn't cover as much as you would like, but I like jumping off from there. I just follow a lot of reporters whose reporting I like on Twitter. And that's where I get a lot of it from. I get it from podcasts. I get it from, and I watch right-wing media too. One, because I got to stay informed about what my opposition is arguing in order to make those sort of videos. But also because I want to make sure I'm not just, in an eggshell, in a bubble, and making sure that I see every news story from different angles. I can't say there's, one in particular besides Axios. I'll just read in the morning, and Twitter in general. But I encourage everyone to do that, because if you're getting your news source from one place, it's gonna be biased. It doesn't matter what the place is. If you think your place is perfect, you're wrong. And I'll say that about my favorite places too. So I preach variety as opposed to any one specific thing.
No, definitely variety. It's like my YouTube feed is mostly just people I like, independent media. If I was going to read, I do like Matt Taibbi. I do like Glenn Greenwald. There are a few others who I think journalists are really good. I even like Mehdi Hassan, to be honest. I know him and Matt Taibbi went back and forth, but Mehdi Hassan has had very, very good segments that I've seen covered on like YouTube, like a Breaking Points with Crystal and Sagar, or Kyle Kalinske with Secular Talk, or even a Jimmy Dore, who I think is silly at times, but if you can get past his hyperbole, there's some good stuff in there. And then there's like, I used to actually, not be a fan is a bad word, but I used to have a lot more respect for Steven Crowder. And it's just recently, the past maybe 2 or 3 years, it's like he's just gone so far off the deep end. Like the Change My Mind stuff, I think was very, very good and very, very useful. But other than that, it's kind of like, man, you are just dog shit. And I hope he knows he's dog shit, because he's just dog shit.
It's funny you say that. Well, for obviously, like, was it last week? I was going off on Steven Crowder a lot for obvious reasons. But like, I had the same. I never agreed with Steven Crowder really on anything. But I did like that content that he made, the Change Your Mind. I thought I watched it to learn the techniques that he used to make these engaging debates. And sometimes he was fairly respectful and debating in good faith. Sometimes he was using techniques that were a little shady. Anytime you go onto a college campus and debate college students when you're a fully informed grown man who does this for a living, you're fighting with an advantage. And people should recognize that when watching it. But I did feel like back in those days, he was at least his own man doing his own thing. Whereas I feel like nowadays he's drank the Kool-Aid too much, and has become what he used to stand against, which happens to a lot of people. But yeah, I definitely think that I don't think he argues in good faith as much as he used to.
Well, in his defense, he would like to debate the professors, right? But the professors won't see him. The colleges don't want him there. And, you could say he's out debating the college kids. Well, that's who you should be talking to. That's who anybody should be talking to kind of get different viewpoints that he has. Now, I skip a lot of his stuff, but there's some things occasionally I go, okay, that's a good point, right? There's some things you can take from everything. Like even I'll go back to Jimmy Dore, the Nord Stream pipeline. from the very beginning, he was like, the U.S. did this. And I was like, great, Jimmy, where's the evidence? He's kind of like, I know it, here it is, but there's never like the full evidence. And yeah, a few months later, there is some evidence. So yeah, I guess he was kind of right, maybe, but you still need that evidence from a news source. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't just watch him, because you can, as long as you understand someone's biases and realize, okay, this is hyperbole, you can still kind of pick and cherry pick the truths from an argument from anybody.
Yeah, no, for sure. And, Jimmy Dore, as you said, everyone's going to be biased. You can appreciate people that you disagree with and people that you agree with, as long as you acknowledge both of their biases. And there's value in learning what other people are saying, even if it's wrong. Or as you said, he's jumping to a conclusion. That just because he's jumping to a conclusion doesn't necessarily mean he's wrong. And I'm not going to speak on the Nord Stream because I haven't read up on it recently enough to say that that's a hot topic to make declarative statements on, like we're just saying. But I do think that everyone, it's best to assume that someone's acting in good faith. It's best to assume that the person's making a legitimate argument, and that because if you just dismiss it, then you're not challenging your own beliefs. Like if you just dismiss everything a conservative says or everything a liberal says, and you're like, well, of course you say that, you're part of the X group here. You're not challenging your own beliefs. You're not actually testing them. And you should be listening to people outside of outside of your own side of the aisle, right?
Right. Which is another reason I don't like to self-identify. It's like, well, what's the issue? What is the issue at hand? What are we talking about? And you do have to challenge your beliefs. And the best way I challenge my beliefs is through podcasting, right? I know you're going to challenge some of my beliefs, and that's a good thing. That's how I learn and grow. And I can be like, okay, I agree with you. You convinced me. Or I can be like, yeah, I understand your perspective. Respectfully disagree. And for example, a few weeks ago, I had Desmond Ryan on the podcast, who is a former Toronto police detective, now turned author. And Defund the Police came up, because we're talking about police, so naturally Defund's going to come up. And my big thing with Defund the Police is we agreed on mental health. Mental health needs funding. Mental health needs help from the police side as well as the people they're policing side. Now, I never understood, why should the money come from the police department to fund mental health? That was always my thing. And from the left or the right, I never really heard a good argument for it that was like made sense to me. And he was just like, you're taking the burden off of the police and putting it on the mental workers. It makes sense that they would foot the bill for it, because they don't necessarily need that money anymore. It's like, agree, disagree. That's a valid point. That is the best explanation I heard. I can't say I still 100% agree with it, but I can't say he's wrong in that either.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think that's an excellent point. I kind of want to read up on what he has to say now, because I think that is the better point. I think the Defund the Police movement is a movement that comes out of a bubble, like we said. Like, as a leftist who's read Marx, who understands all of the complexities of all of this, Defund the Police makes sense, because it's like, people who I talk to every day, we understand that the state uses the police to enforce certain things about the capitalist hierarchy, and we're fighting against that. So therefore we have to defund the police. And that argument makes sense to someone who spends all their time in the leftist bubble. But to the average American, they're like, what do you mean defund the police? They're the people we call when we're in trouble. They help us, and it's such a dumb argument. But as the police officer made it sound like, the police aren't necessarily supposed to do everything. Why would you send a police officer to deal with a mental health issue? Why not send a social service worker, someone who's actually trained to do that sort of thing? If you send a guy with a gun to handle a situation that he's untrained to handle, of course people are going to die. like it's just, by doing that, you're putting the police in a bad situation. It's not necessarily that a cop is racist or that they want to hurt someone. It's that they don't have the training to deal with certain things, and we shouldn't be asking them to deal with it. And so we should create better services that we don't just pile all onto the police. And I think the police, that police officer whose name I forget right now, I'll listen back to it later so I can look him up. I think he made a great point there.
Yeah, it is a good point. But to your point as well, with the social worker or the clinical physician or mental health worker. Yes, mental health worker is suited to do that job in the proper setting, in a clinical setting. So just as a police officer is meant to be a mental health worker is meant to be a cop either. So like I would never send a mental health worker on the street to answer a call. No. That person needs to be brought into like a doctor's office, a setting that is appropriate for mental health work, especially if they're all erratic. The last thing, when you're angry, the last thing you want to hear is calm down. Like that doesn't work either, and it's dangerous. You need someone I don't know how you would do it, but like my mother was a social worker, and she worked with people, like dangerous people in a mental hospital, and there were always guards there just in case something happened. Now she would be there in her setting, but outside the door was an officer just in case. So yeah, it's like that. I guess like with the Defund the Police movement or even police reform. So, police officers still need to be in those roles. It's just a matter of how do we do that and how do we get that person who's having an episode safely into a position where that clinical social worker or psychologist can do their job.
Yeah. And I think that this is like an easy one to understand. And I'm going to push back a little on what you said about, the in a clinical setting, because think about EMTs. Like EMTs are trained to handle physical medical trauma in the field, in settings that are not clinical at all. You can do the same thing with mental health, like just because it's physical versus mental health, you can have a professional, like think of, I don't actually know the terminology here within the field, but I'm sure it exists. But think of like a negotiator, you see movies with like hostile negotiations. Yep. That person is kind of what we're describing. And obviously that's a very intense situation, but that's a person who's trained to deal with a variety of mental health issues on the fly in a high intensity, people could die situation. And that person does work for the police, but they also work as a mental health professional. Oftentimes like they have multiple roles because their skill set is applicable to many things. And you could break that down in many different ways. And if it ends up that we're spending more on this stuff than we're currently spending on police budgets, I'm okay with that. Yeah. I just think that we need to distribute our resources in a reasonable way. And as I said, like when someone is causing a disturbance because it's an autistic child, and they're freaking out and people are worried. We've seen situations where that happens and the cop ends up killing them because they don't know how to handle that situation, where if you sent a special aid teacher, I forget the exact terminology, but like to that autistic child, they could just handle it like that because they handle it every day, and so that's kind of what we're talking about here. And even beyond that, with police, it's like the way we structure our policing makes a huge difference. When you see like small towns who have police who live in the town, conflict with police rarely happens. But when you have big cities where the police are coming in from the suburbs and working in the cities, and they're working in areas with people they do not know, they're like, those police officers are going to be more scared. Like I'm scared when I'm in a part of town that I haven't been before, and it looks kind of scary. Everyone is. But if you hire police officers from within the communities to police the communities themselves, you see better results. And a change just like that, it doesn't have to defund the police in any way, shape, or form, but it would create better results that are more equitable to the communities that are being policed. And I think that oftentimes in this debate, it's one side versus the other when there is such a wide spectrum of policies that most reasonable people will agree on. And if we just talked about them more, we might actually be able to move forward and find a solution. It doesn't have to be us versus them. You know what I mean?
Oh, 1,000%. And a lot of it, like defund the police is just a terrible slogan. I think most people would agree with that. But I do think change needs to be there. When it comes to money, most of the time it's just reallocating. You already had the money is already there. You just need to spend it more wisely. It's the same thing I do with taxes. Should we raise or lower taxes? Well, where is the money currently going? If you can't answer that question, the answer is don't raise or lower them. It's answer that question first. It's like we probably have enough tax money to end homelessness. We have enough tax money to afford Medicare for all. We probably do.
It's not probably. We definitely have enough tax money. It's a couple tanks off the military budget will end homelessness in a major city.
Yeah, or 10% of what we give into Ukraine can easily end homelessness 3 times over. But
I think it's something like $20 billion to end homelessness. Like again, it's a lot of money, but it's not that much money. You know what I mean?
It's not money we don't spend or print on other things anyway. So at the end of the day, it's not defund, it's reallocate. It's just reallocation, and you need people to come together on that. And that's very hard. It's very hard to talk to people. Now you are a progressive. What's it like dealing with other progressives? Because you critique Biden very fairly. Because I don't consider Biden progressive at all. I barely consider Bernie Sanders or AOC progressive anymore. They say they are. They say the right things, but their actions say very, very different things. So is it hard for you as a progressive to critique other progressives?
For sure. And I mean, that's when you're dealing with the most difficult conversations, honestly. I feel like, especially on the left, I'm sure this happens on the right too, I just don't exist there. Like, it can get very infighty, and it can become a situation where you attack the people closest to you because they're closest to you. And that sucks. But for the most part, I try and build relationships. I try and sit down every conversation I have with people, and I kind of put it like this: like, everyone, I advocate for things like systemic racism and how there's massive differentials in the amount of wealth Black people have versus the amount of wealth white people have, not because necessarily any one specific person is racist, but because the accumulation of policies over the past hundreds of years have put these people in a worse position from the moment they're born, and they go to a bad school. They don't get taught well. They don't get taught personal finance. They don't get taught whatever, how to be successful. They only see adults around them who are also in poverty, and they don't get the same teachings and learning and valuable lessons that I received through no fault of either of our own, right? And I think a lot of progressives understand that when it comes to disenfranchised minorities. But they don't understand that when it comes to anyone else. They don't understand that someone could hold a conservative position because they had shitty teachers. They grew up in a conservative bubble. They weren't exposed to these ideas. And everyone is on their own path of learning and understanding, and you should approach them as such. And that's how I try and treat my conversation. So when I talk to people on the left or on the right, no matter what, I'll get vitriol thrown at me, and I feel like it's my job to just be patient and calm with them, and until we can just have a normal, level-headed conversation. I get attacked from both the left and the right. Both have a lot of animosity, but when I get attacked from the left, it does hurt more. Because it's like, bro, we should be agreeing. like you can disagree with what I'm saying, but drop the personal attacks. We should be building a community here, not tearing each other down. And unfortunately, that does happen quite often.
Yeah, it does. I think I do. I agree. Like, there's, even with people, people on YouTube that I do follow, there is infighting, like the Force to Vote. 2020, Nancy Pelosi was up for speakership again. That was a big battle between progressives on the left. Mm-hmm. Should be forced to vote to not and withhold your vote for Nancy Pelosi to get a Medicare for all vote on the floor. Now, would it have passed? No, it wouldn't have. Medicare for all would not have passed. You would not have accomplished your goal. That's not the point, though, in my opinion. This is my opinion now. You would have gotten a vote. What is the point of Congress? They vote on things. That's really what they're supposed to do. And you get an idea of, okay, where is that? And you want to put money where their mouth is. And we just saw it this past election with McCarthy. They forced a vote. You want to be speakership, you got to do these concessions. Now, those going to happen? Some of them have, some of them might. We'll see with the debt ceiling. But do you remember the forced to vote thing? And with progressives specifically, how progressives attacked that issue? Where did you fall on that?
So, my memory of the specific mechanics of that issue is a little hazy, but in general, I'll speak more generally. I think that there are two camps in this. There's progressives who are for electoralism, and there's progressives who want to burn the whole system down. And the progressives who want to burn the whole system down, they often do say things like, oh, you shouldn't vote for Biden in the general because he's just a stopgap mechanism that's going to slowly cause, conservative progress, whatever. And it's like, sure, but you're playing with people's lives, like real lives in this situation. They at least treat this with the weight it deserves of people are going to die that wouldn't otherwise have if you don't vote for, the Democrat in the general. You don't have to support Democrats, the DNC, and, as a whole, but you should always be fighting to win electorally. Like, that is the goal of the game. If you don't play the game, the only other option is armed revolution. And I'm not picking up a gun and killing anyone. And the vast majority of people aren't. And in fact, nonviolent revolutions are twice as successful as violent revolutions. Work the electoral system, play the game. It's the first time in human history that our ruling class has given the general population tools to overthrow them peacefully. And you should take advantage of that instead of just, oh, well, I can't support this because, like there are people who, I'll never vote for Nancy Pelosi because she's XYZ, which I don't like Nancy Pelosi, but like, come on.
I don't think you ever should vote. I don't think you ever should vote for, I mean, obviously we can't vote for Nancy Pelosi. We're not in her district. We're not millionaires.
Exactly.
But the idea of don't vote for Biden because Republican bad, if you vote that way and that's why you voted, hey man, I get it. Like, I get it. Trump is bad, right? And Republicans are out of their fucking mind. Democrats are useless, but Republicans are out of their mind. I think that's fair in my mind. However,
it's the old Simpsons meme, like the Democrats, like we want to make everything work.
Democrats, we can't govern. And we can't govern. Dude, that episode came out in 1994, and it's still accurate. It's still accurate. It's fucking nuts. But my point is, Democrats know that mentality exists. They're going to vote for us because they're not going to vote for them. Now, that doesn't work because they're never going to change. So if you play the game, you're just going to continue playing their game. And they had that mentality in 2016, and look what happened. Trump won. And if Trump just was embraced mail-in voting, guess what? He would have won again. And what's going to happen in 2024? Who knows? It's going to be Trump versus Biden, most likely, and I still think it's a coin flip. So if you are a progressive, yes, play the game, force the vote, do what you are elected to do, like an AOC or the squad. I'm going to pick on the squad because it's easier to pick on the squad. You are elected to go there and challenge Pelosi, and you're not doing it. The whole thing with what was the bill, the construction bill,
Build Back Better.
Like it was supposed to be the two bills. In the progressive squad, they froze and they got a shitty bill, the infrastructure bill. And they were playing the game and then they just didn't. So you do have to play the game, but you got to play it correctly. I think that's where a lot of the infighting is with progressives, is that they don't know how to play it correctly because it's saying, oh, I'm going to buddy with Pelosi and get rewarded for it. No, you're not. Because they hate you. They fucking hate you. And I think progressives need to realize that. They're not on your side. Biden is not on your side if you're a progressive.
Yes. And while that is being said, my brand name is Counterpoint Politics. I'm going to provide a counterpoint to what you're saying. While I generally agree with you that like the squad can lack balls, for lack of a better term, to look at this like silver lining perspective, and this is something that a lot of people, even like progressives, don't really realize, is that, and again, you don't necessarily have to be a socialist if you're a progressive, but like the movement of socialism is generally aligned with your worldview more than the movement of conservatism, right? So like there are more registered socialists, like people registered to a socialist party in this country than at any point in our history. There are more socialist members of Congress, I believe there's 9 of them now, than at any point in our history. We are seeing more labor movements, more unions forming in the last 2 years than at any point in modern history. And there are a lot of reasons to be hopeful. Like, I can criticize the squad all I can, but the progressive movement in general is stronger now than at any point in my lifetime. And that doesn't necessarily mean I think we have a very strong position, but it means, hey, I do think that the kind of horseshoe theory that I was talking about before, even the Americans who, like, Americans know they're fed up. Americans hate Congress. They hate the two-party system, and they know that something's got to give. And conservatism in general says, let's keep doing things the same way. And so, like, I think that people across the spectrum identify the right bad guys, right? They identify corporate greed. They identify government corruption. Like, these are things that people on the left and the right I see saying all the time. And if we can just kind of get together and like agree, like I have like a 4-point system on not fixing everything, but everyone can agree on this and it will help. 1, get rid of first past the post voting, replace it with ranked choice voting. When you have a winner take all system, you are forced to vote against your opponent instead of for the person you actually want. And that creates the 2-party system.
Let me pause right there real quick, though.
Go ahead.
On ranked choice voting, I 1,000% agree with you. I think it's very, very effective. Alaska, that is why, what's her name, the kooky lady, Palin, didn't win. But then again, they did it for New York City mayoral election, and it's confusing. That is the one thing I will say about ranked choice voting. It's very, very confusing. Please continue.
It's confusing to you now or to us now because we're less used to it. If we implement it now, our kids will be like, yeah, no, it's just easy. Like, this is how voting works. Like it's not actually like I believe the American population can figure it out.
It's going to take a cycle or two, but I do think I agree with you. It is the very much way to do it. They just need someone to market it and sell it better. Because if you break it down, it really is. It makes the most sense. But it's like, wait, there's 2 rounds, there's 3 rounds of voting for more than one person. It's hard to conceptualize, but once it's there, it works. So I agree with you. Ranked choice voting, number 1. That's a great start. Number 2, what you got?
Number 2 is get money out of politics, end the Citizens United decision, end corporate lobbying. Fun fact for people who don't know it: if the American population supports 0% of the American population supports a bill versus 100% of the American population supports a bill, there's hardly a change in its probability of it becoming law. But if you narrow that population down to just the top 10%, it is a direct correlation between the more people who support the bill, the more likely it is to pass. And that is because of lobbying in Congress. So we need to get the money out of politics, stop, end corporate lobbying, end Citizens United, and stop Congress from being able to trade stock. I think those are positions that the vast majority of Americans on both sides of the aisle will agree with. And if we can unite each other over that, we can force our politicians to adopt those rules.
What is it that Dan Crenshaw said? How are we going to better ourselves? Is this like, oh man, I used to like Dan Crenshaw. I used to think he was very reasonable. I thought he said a lot of smart things. I was also a Tulsi person. I liked Tulsi too. In the past 2-3 years, both of them just off the deep end, completely like, you guys are so stupid. Why would you say something so stupid? You're a public. I think people forget politicians are public servants. They are not celebrities. They are not supposed to be rich. They are public servants. And I think this is a me idea now. How much should politicians be paid? What's the average income of your state? That's how much you're paid. If the average income of Nebraska is $36,000, guess what? You're getting paid $36,000. Have fun affording an apartment in D.C. Try a second job.
And most of them have second jobs and alternate income streams. They're fine. They don't need more. They, as you said, they are public servants. I like to liken especially the president. I think we should think about him like we think about our head football coaches. If you are unwilling to criticize Biden in the same way that you or Trump or whoever your guy is, in the same way that you would criticize your head football coach, like as you said earlier, like the leftist in fighting, I'll get people like yelling at me like, you shouldn't criticize him like this. This is our guy. We got to support him. It's like, just because he's our guy doesn't mean I have to support every decision he makes. I yell at Nick Sirianni all the fucking time on Twitter. It doesn't mean that like I don't love the Eagles. I yell at him because I want the Eagles to be better.
Right.
And it's the same thing with Biden, with any politician out there. The conservatives always say, like, take personal responsibility. I say they need to take personal responsibility as well. The government also needs to take personal responsibility as well as individuals. And only when we're all working together to take personal responsibility, both collectively and personally, will we actually improve and make our society better.
Right. All right, so we have ranked choice voting, money out of politics.
Ranked choice voting, money out of politics. Third one is get rid of the Electoral College. That's like the most unsupported one, I feel like.
Okay, yeah. Okay, please.
But with that one, the reason I say get rid of the Electoral College is because it basically invalidates the votes of the majority of Americans. You live in New York, so you should understand this. No matter who you vote for president, it's not going to change the actual effect of your vote. If you're a conservative in New York, you're screwed. If you're a conservative in California, you're screwed. If you're a liberal in Alabama, you're screwed. There's absolutely nothing you can do to actually affect the presidential race. People will say, oh, it protects small states. And it's like, no, that's not actually what it does, because Alabama isn't good. Like, they're always going to vote red. They're a small state. Louisiana, Mississippi, like all of these states are small, but the Electoral College hurts them. It only helps the states in our country that are polarized, that are purple. Those are the ones that really matter. And so if we just let everyone have an equal vote in this country, you would end up with a politician that represents the people more, instead of just the people of Pennsylvania, Iowa, I don't know the other ones. Florida sometimes, but not so much anymore. Sometimes. Yeah, it changes every election. But like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, it changes. As we said, it changes every time. But like those purple states are the ones that actually really matter. And if you're voting outside of them, you might as well not even vote.
Well, I get that, right? I do understand that, but I see Electoral College as a check. It's a check and it's a balance, because it gives the minority more power. But
it doesn't, though. Like, how does it functionally give the minority more power?
Because otherwise, most presidential elections would be dictated by California, New York, and like Boston, like Chicago, the cities, right? The cities, you gotta have a representative. It's a representative republic democracy. It's a democratic republic democracy. It's a hybrid of all those bullshit, right? So the people in Middle America, the people who live in Alabama, have a voice in this. Farmers and suburban people. Upstate New York, they have a voice in federal politics. Now, for state elections, state senators, conservatives have more of a voice, and like especially in New York, upstate New York's all red. West Massachusetts, all red. Northern California, red. So there is the checks and balances there for state elections, but for federal elections, specifically president, I get it, because I think you're right. It does give more power to the purple states, as opposed to, without Electoral College, it gives all the power to the blue states. Now, if you're going to ask me, who I'd rather have the concentrated power be towards, I'd rather be purple. I'd rather be purple than red, or specifically blue. And again,
I think like the argument you're making, like, and I think you kind of just realize it, is that and I can get behind we should go to the center of America, and if we're going to give more importance to any state, then it should be the purple ones. And I can agree with that. I just don't think that your value to this country should be determined by what state you live in. I think everyone is created equal and therefore should have an equal vote. You said that cities will determine. No, cities don't determine. People determine. People just happen to live in the city. In those cities. And what you're arguing for is the Senate, which I also think is stupid. But what you're on for is the Senate. It gives smaller states more power, right? But I think it has become to such an absurd degree that someone in California has 67 times less voting power than someone in Wyoming. And like, that's insane. And people were like, oh, well, you have to protect, the states. And it's like, states don't vote. They aren't people. They don't matter. They're just arbitrary lines in the sand. They don't have to. If the state died, no one would cry. But if a person dies, someone would, right? Like that's how I think everyone should have an equal vote. And I don't think that's incredibly. It surprises me how contentious of an argument that is, because I think that like our very like basic kindergartner brains could be like, oh no, it makes sense that everyone would have an equal vote. And if I move from California to Wyoming, my vote shouldn't be discredited by 67 times. Or the opposite of that. But yeah.
I would make a compromise in Electoral College. If you want to get rid of the Electoral College, okay, but presidential needs like a 60% majority to win.
we won't have a president. Well,
I know, but like I don't think a simple democracy. This is a principled stance. I can't think of a specific example, but like a principled stance. I don't think like a one vote difference should determine anything. I think you should, if you want a majority, if you want to do majority rule, it should be a high majority. Which is why we can talk about the filibuster too. But I had a friend say that he believes that the filibuster should be higher. If you want to change something, you need more people agreeing on things. That's the thing that should actually be changed. Because if it's 50-50, you're just going to be having constant change back and forth, which isn't going to solve anything. So if you want to get rid of the Electoral College for presidential election, I say it can't be 50-50. It should be like 60 or 65. I think that's a pretty fair compromise.
So I disagree with that too. And I'm going to steal a term from conservatives where they say run the government like you run a business, right?
Right.
And if you listen to many like business leaders, like big CEOs, big, very successful people, one of the things that they say over and over again is if you want to succeed, fail and fail fast. Because the more you fail, the more you learn, and the more that you can get done. So anything that, and again, there are always checks and balances. Nothing is an absolute, but I think that systems that make it more difficult to change, the opportunity cost of that is learning what works and what doesn't. I would rather try 10 things and have 4 of them not work than try one thing and have it work. Like to me, progress, and I'm a progressive. This is there's a bit of a tangent, but like when I was like 4 or 5 years old, whatever it was, and the first presidential election I was going on, or watching the news, the debates, and I asked my mom, I was like, what's the difference between a Democrat and a Republican? And she's an independent. My dad was a Republican at the time. And she's like, well, in general, Democrats want to change things and Republicans want to keep things the way they are. And I think that to this day, that explanation to explain it like I'm 5 really still fits.
Yeah, it does. I agree.
And in my mind, I would rather be trying to change things, and even if they don't work, then we know it doesn't work and we can move forward and try something else, instead of just doing the same things we're doing now, which is progressively making our country worse. And I think most Americans agree with that.
I'll keep to your business.
The last part.
I'll keep to your business analogy. Have you ever worked for a startup?
Yes, I have.
So,
yes, I have.
One, I worked right out of school, right out of Hofstra. I got the job. Actually, probably this time 6 years ago, I got the email saying I was hired. So I had about 3 weeks left of college left, knowing I was employed. And I gotta tell you, dude, I didn't give a fuck about classes. It was the best. I just didn't care. But anyway, it was a startup. Their goal was to be the Economist on video. Right? Do you know what Cheddar is? Cheddar News.
Yeah.
So their main competitor at the time was Cheddar. Now, a year and a half later, gone off the face of the earth, unemployed, and it was just a nightmare, right? But what caused the destruction of this startup? It was the consistent, constant change. Every few months, every few weeks, we were changing and pivoting and pivoting. And if you have a system, especially in government, where as polarized as we are now, think of gun laws. If it was a 50-50 split, it would be restrictive gun laws. 4 years later, unrestricted gun laws. 4 years later, restrictive gun laws. 4 years later, unrestricted gun laws. In this, nothing would work. It would be a complete mess. So, especially when times are polarized, this is why I do kind of tend to agree with my friend a little bit. In times of polarized and nobody can agree, keep it as is. Keep it as is until the only thing that's worth changing is something the majority of people agree on, which we would agree. The populace is there on most things. The people you elect can't agree on things. Keep it as is, because the constant change isn't good either. Because if you're just trying to figure it out, especially as a government, you're spending a lot of money you don't have, that's where destruction comes in.
I think that I could get more behind restrictions on the congressional level if we had more change on the electoral level. And unfortunately, I believe the incumbency win rate in this country in Congress is something around 90%.
Yes. Yet
Congress in general has an approval rating of, oh God, I haven't looked at it yet, but
like
I might
13.
be able to count it on my fingers now.
23%.
And so when those two things happen, I don't think I'm a crazy person if I say that isn't right. Like that isn't how things should work, but it is. And so when you have unchanging politicians, and your argument is, well, we need to, if politicians are going to disagree and not change, we need to, slow things down. That's never going to change. It just isn't ever. We're never going to end this period of extreme polarization. If we keep doing things the way we're doing, we're just going to get more polarized. And so I think that there are common sense changes, like term limits and restrictions on gerrymandering and things of that degree. Age limits, I think, are very important because, say what you will, but someone who is 65, 70, 85 isn't going to have a long-term view of this country in the same way that a 30, 40, 50-year-old is. That represents the actual, majority of the population. And I think legal weed is one of those things that people talk about, where I look around. Biden said he'd legalize weed. I think it's over 65% of the country is cool with legal weed. His base would love it. His critics would love it. Why hasn't he done it?
Well, he wrote the crime bill. That's why.
Yeah, he wrote the crime
He
bill.
wrote the crime bill. He's going to release all those people he put in there, please. And Kamala's his vice president. All the people she put in there, please.
Yeah, and it's like this would be an easy. Your approval rating sucks right now. This would be an easy win for you.
Yep.
I was surprised he didn't do it going into the midterms. But it's because he's an old guy who just is not aligned with the average American opinion because he's an octogenarian.
Well, remember what he told his donors: nothing will fundamentally change. And
yeah.
Joe Biden is a status quo boner machine. The only thing that gets his dick hard is the status quo. But we went through 3. Before we went out of time, let's move to the 4th one. What's the 4th way to make change? Electoral College, man. That was a good one.
Yeah. No, and I think the 4th one, and this is the most, I'll say radical one, is making more of our budget up to an at-large vote. And that doesn't necessarily have to mean like everything, but having a small portion of our budget allotted for ballot initiatives where people, and we see this on a local level, where when local communities do this, and this is international as well as local communities within the US, when they appropriate a portion of their budget to be at will on a ballot initiative, or at votes of town hall meetings, whatever it is, it not only does it increase voter participation and civic engagement, it increases people's satisfaction with their government. It makes them more willing to pay taxes because they know they're going towards a place that they have control over, right? Like in America, we complain about high taxes, but we don't really have that high of a tax rate when it comes to a global standard. But we also feel like we get the least value from our taxes. And so when you have a little more direct democracy in how our tax money is being spent, it has shown to increase civic engagement, reduce partisanism, and just make people happier with what their government is providing. So I think that's the 4th probably most radical position, but I think it's really only radical because it's new. I don't necessarily think it's fundamentally incompatible with what a lot of Americans think.
It would be hard to do because, like, for example, I actually live in New Jersey. So New Jersey has a very high property tax rate, but those property taxes fund schools. That's what the tax is designed to do. So I think a lot of those things might be already built in. But if you're like, hey, man, if every American could just write down 5 things, 20% of your taxes are going to go to these 5 things, Americans would all write the correct things. I trust the American people to say the right things, to be healthcare, education, whatever. Firefighters, insert whatever they want here. It wouldn't be the military, right? It wouldn't. Some people would say the military, and that's fine. If you want to say the military, you think the military should be funded more, great. You can allocate your money there. But it's the smartest thing Cardi B ever said. You don't give receipts for your taxes, which I think is bullshit. Yeah. It's the only thing you pay for that you don't get a receipt for.
Especially if it goes to the military where they've failed 5 audits in a row and don't know where our money's going.
Yeah.
But no, I get that. And that's why it gives people a personal stake. And it's not something that should be instituted federally right away. It's something that should start on more local levels and be tested out and eventually moved up to the federal level. I do think that sort of change needs to be implemented incrementally. But I do think it's something that would solve a lot of problems, both with how our money's being spent and how people feel about how our money's being spent.
All right. I'm going to wrap this up with one more thing. Primaries, Democratic primaries, Republican primaries. I mean, it's Trump versus DeSantis. I'm picking Trump because I think DeSantis has run a terrible campaign, even hasn't announced yet. But I want to stick to the Democrats because you are the leftist. No debates. No RFK, no Marianne. Well, RFK mentioned, but RFK Jr., excuse me. No Marianne mentioned really on mainstream news. You as a progressive, how much does that bust your chops? Bernie Sanders, day one, we talk about playing politics, got nothing for his endorsement and completely gave Marianne the cold shoulder. If you're a progressive, I'm assuming you're supporting Marianne. As someone who isn't defined as a progressive, I would also vote for Marianne, to be honest. I think she has great policies. So, Democratic primaries, do Democrats love democracy? Is that bullshit too? What do you think?
Yeah, no, we literally, this was a segment on the left wing. We did a practice run of our first left wing show, and this was a segment we did. And it judges from poll to poll, but like at least around half of Democrats don't want Biden to run again. And and Biden said he would be a one-term president, and he's retracting that promise. And it's like, if 50% of your own voter base doesn't want you to run again, like from the DNC's perspective, how do you look at Joe and go, yeah, we're going to support you? Like that blows my mind. That's just fundamentally undemocratic. And I can understand the pragmatic electoralism reason for not having debates, but like, come on. like that's not the will of the people. And as public servants, you should be going with the will of the people here and the will of your own party. The people running the DNC should be considered equal votes to the DNC electorate. And that's not what the Democratic Party actually wants. So I think it's bullshit that they aren't having debates. I think it's bullshit that they're just giving it to Joe Biden. I think Joe Biden is going to win no matter what happens because of the massive incumbency advantage of being the president of the United States. But I think the DNC is just rolling the dice because I genuinely believe if Biden runs and anyone but Trump is on the Republican ticket, it's going to be a bloodbath. It's going to force me to root for Trump in the Republican primary because I think that DeSantis, you might have your problems with how he's running a campaign, but he'll be running against a president who has a very low approval rating. And I don't think it's going to go well for Biden unless he's running against Trump, who also had a low approval rating as a president.
DeSantis would destroy Joe Biden in the national election. It wouldn't even be close. It wouldn't be close.
If I'm a Republican, and I can't imagine voting for Trump because DeSantis is basically the same thing, like from a policy perspective. And I can't understand anything that would say that he would have a worse chance than Trump. Like,
I don't think DeSantis can beat Trump in a primary, though. That's the problem.
I know.
It's just crazy about how the politics there works. But yeah, I just don't like the main thing about Democrats that I just can't stand is their platitudes and like their hypocrisy. It's like, we are the democracy party. Now don't mind us while we completely ignore democracy.
Yeah.
It's just like, guys, and it hurts me to see people like on the left defend them. It's like Republicans know what they're getting into. It's why I respect Republicans as much as I disagree with them. They know what they're getting. They're not being sold a bill of goods. Democrats are being sold a bill of goods and they still fall for it. And it's just, it's sad.
I think both sides get sold a bill of goods. I think that's a little unfair because I think Trump, for example, is a wonderful example of this, where he's like,
he did sell a bill of goods.
I'm the elitist outsider. And it's like, you're a goddamn, like, the thing you're known for is being a rich, golden, gilded asshole. Like, that's the thing you're known. You're not you're not fighting for the little guy. If you think that Trump would be the guy fighting for the little guy, I don't know what about his branding made you think that, but like, literally he dips his house in gold. Like, Jesus Christ, if you wrote a character that like dipped their house in gold, was running for president and fighting for the little guy, it would be known as satire, but it happened in reality. And it's fine if you're like, I get that, but like, but I do think that that's also selling a bill of goods. It's just, he's sold people under the river there, and I think Elon Musk is another great example of that. Not necessarily Republican for sure, but like he always goes on about, oh, well, if your beliefs are the same as, the corporate blah, blah, blah. It's like, dude, you're the richest man on earth. You are not fighting. You're not the underdog here. It blows my mind that people think that way. But, I can't understand everyone in America, or else I would be president.
Yeah, Elon, exactly. Elon's another one. He's the free speech warrior who bans journalists from Twitter because they make fun of the jet. So, yeah. And I like Elon. I think overall, Elon is a net positive. He's just a dick. He likes to troll, and he has his interests that he has to follow. So, we'll end it there. We're not going to go on Elon. We'll bring it back. My goal is my rule is once a quarter. So once July hits, we'll bring it back. But before we go, the final question of Talking with Tarashuk podcast always goes to the guest. So, Mr. Jon Cooper, anything you want to ask me, my friend? The time is now.
Oh, I should have prepared for this. I guess the thing to ask you is, you run a lot of podcasts. If I were to do a podcast, someone who, is listening to my content, I already told you I'm doing the roundtable news discussion, but if I were to make a podcast, what would your advice be?
Just start. Just literally what you do. There's multiple ways you can do it. So if you want to do it the quick way, you have, like you did like 4 or 5 clips on what happened in New York City subway, right? The guy who was murdered.
Mm-hmm.
You could just do a solo show and just talk about that and like throw to those clips and like do that kind of a thing. You could also just do a solo show and just start talking, or you could do what you're already doing, kind of just talk with people and have guests on and people who would disagree with. Like, I had people in my comments on TikTok like, hey, man, come on the show, let's talk. And they were great. There was one of them was actually a former veteran. He was an Air Force mechanic, really cool guy. So I would say the thing you do is like you already have an audience too, but you do on TikTok. It's very hard for TikTok to leave TikTok and follow you elsewhere. So you're going to be starting from scratch no matter what you do. But the best advice is just start. You know, you already have your persona, you have your voice, you have your content. Just start, recycle your content. And when you do the podcast, you're going to have other pieces of content. Like there's going to be plenty of clips you can cut here of just you explaining things that you can put on your TikTok. You know, just tag me, shit like that. So the best thing to do is just to start. You know, you already did the hard part. You built an audience and you have a topic and you're good at it and you did all the thinking behind it. Like I did want to ask you like how hard it is to grow with the algorithms on this kind of topic, because YouTube's going to do you no favors. YouTube is, because you're independent news, YouTube is going to pretend you don't exist and push you down in the algorithm on purpose. So be aware of that. But that's
I've been trepidatious about. I've been starting to put shorts on YouTube. Yeah, and I've written a couple videos that I have to get around to making. So hopefully I can get around it. But you know, as you said, that what I'm focused on right now, I'm growing, expanding different channels because if TikTok goes, the whole TikTok bill is scaring the crap out of me. Like I have migrated my audience to Instagram relatively successfully. And so I feel a lot better about that now. So now it's about trying to monetize and stop working a day job eventually. That would be the dream.
That is the dream. Although not my dream. I love my day job. I never want to leave my day job. I'm totally cool with talking with Tarashuk being like secondary income, like an emergency savings fund. But hey man, I understand. This shit is fun. Talking to a microphone is fun. Now, excuse me while I go and cut a billion clips for this. So, Mr. Jon Cooper, thank you very much for being on the podcast. It was great having you. I'm glad I remembered you from Hofstra, and I finally had the balls to ask you to come on the podcast. Thought we did a great job. So one last time, anything you want to plug, anything you want to share, anything you want to say, my friend, the floor is yours.
Yeah, as I said, be kind out there to people. Always, in any political discourse, assume that the person you're talking to is just a kid online who needs better teachers, right? If you want to follow me, you like what I said, as I mentioned before, I'm Counterpoint Politics on TikTok, Counterpoint_politics on Instagram. Follow me there and be on the lookout for the left wing coming soon to a podcast and a YouTube channel near you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Will Tarashuk. That's T as in Thomas, Arashuk. This has been the Talking with Tarashuk podcast. If you want to be a guest, reach out to me at will@apspodcast.com. It's will@apspodcast.com, and we'll have you on the show. As long as you make me go, ooh, that's interesting, I will bring you on the podcast. We'll talk for an hour. You get copies of everything I create, because my podcast is a service to you, not only the listener, you, the guest. Next week, I'm speaking to Ryan Sullivan. I only made this plug last week, but I made a mistake, and it's actually next week. A man who's been podcasting for quite a while. He runs a podcast principles company. We'll talk a lot about podcasting, the industry, what his business is, and how we can help each other. So that's going to be a lot of fun, because podcasting is also a networking tool. Don't forget that. We'll be there next week. We'll see you there. But until then, y'all take care.